Welcome to Hellenic Heritage Journeys. Here, we share the fascinating stories hidden within Greece's archaeological sites. In every episode, we take a journey through space and time, uncovering the traces of people who lived, created, and left their mark thousands of years ago. Follow the thread of history with us from yesterday to today. This episode was created in collaboration with Marketing Greece. Imagine yourself standing in the shadow of the imposing Mount Saos on the island of Samothrace. It is night, and the light of torches flickers across marble surfaces and friezes that seem to come alive before your eyes. Figures of women in procession. Are they performing a sacred dance, or are these scenes from a mythical wedding? In your palm you clutch an iron ring, and around your waist is tied a purple sash. You are ready to be initiated into sacred rites that will bind you to gods whose names must remain unspoken, and to witness symbols known only to the initiated. Whatever you see and hear will bind you to a sacred oath of silence, an oath that unites gods and mortals. In this episode, we travel to an island in northern Greece to be initiated into the mysteries of the great gods at their sanctuary on Samothrace, where secrets run deeper than the sea that surrounds the island. Samothrace was known throughout the ancient world for its imposing sanctuary, where the great gods were worshipped and their renowned mysteries took place. Yet the names of the great gods themselves remained strictly secret, as did the rituals performed there. Only one writer of the Hellenistic period, Mnaseas, dared to mention three of the deities: Axieros, whom he identified with the goddess Demeter, Axiokersa, whom he associated with Persephone, and Axiokersos, whom he equated with Hades. To these, he later added Kasmilos, whom he identified with Hermes. What set the mysteries at the sanctuary of the great gods on Samothrace apart from other mystery cults of the time, such as the Eleusinian mysteries, was their open character. Here, anyone who wished could be initiated, with absolutely no restriction of gender, nationality, or social status. Moreover, initiation at Samothrace was not tied to the major annual festivals held in honor of the gods. It could take place whenever a believer arrived at the sanctuary. There was, however, one natural and practical limitation: access to the island by sea. As a result, initiation was effectively limited to the period from April to November, the months when weather conditions allowed sea travel in the North Aegean. At both Samothrace and Eleusis, initiation consisted of 2 degrees. Those who received the first degree were called mystes, while those who attained the second and higher degree were known as epoptes. At the Eleusinian mysteries, a mystis had to wait at least 1 year before being admitted to the second degree of initiation. By contrast, on Samothrace, this could even be granted on the same day. But what exactly was the process of initiation? What did it offer the faithful that led them to travel from distant lands to come here to the sanctuary of the great gods on Samothrace? And how, in the end, did this sanctuary come to be one of the most renowned in the ancient world? According to ancient sources, initiation into the mysteries of the great gods secured for the participant protection at sea, a promise of immense value to the sailors in ancient times. This protection was associated with the porphyrida, a purple cloth that the mystis tied around their waist during the ceremonies. At the same time, as Diodorus, the ancient Greek historian and writer, tells us, initiation made the person more pious and just. Moreover, at least from the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, participation in the mysteries of Samothrace was also associated with securing a privileged place in the underworld. Of course, the initiate acquired a bond, a sacred union, with the great gods. It is very likely that, beyond the porphyrida, this bond was also sealed with another sacred token given during initiation, iron rings. But what mystical ritual did one have to follow to be bound eternally to the great gods? The ceremony takes place at night, and the darkness is broken only by the flickering light of torches and oil lamps. In this atmosphere, the rites begin, allowing the pilgrim to receive the first degree of initiation, to become a mystis. The word mystis comes from the verb mio, meaning to close the eyes. Its very etymology invites us to imagine that, at some stage of the initiation, the participant may have kept their eyes closed. Before advancing to the 2nd degree of initiation, the epoptia, the mystis appears to have been required to follow a form of preparation. According to one interpretation, before entering the space where the higher rite was performed, the initiate had to undergo something like a confession and possibly purification through rites of cleansing and consecration. Then came a revelation, as the word epoptia itself suggests, deriving from the verb ephoro, meaning to observe or to behold. In this way, the initiate became an epoptis, receiving the 2nd degree of initiation. At both stages, the priest performed a series of rites and offerings and revealed sacred symbols to the initiate, symbols kept secret from those who had not been initiated. At the sanctuary, annual festivals were also held in honor of the gods, during which worshippers watched a sacred drama. Part of this sacred drama reenacted the abduction of the goddess Persephone by the god of the underworld, Pluto. Yet we are at the mysteries of Samothrace, where whatever took place had to remain secret. Many details cannot be stated with certainty, and it is precisely this that makes the story of this sacred place all the more mystical and compelling. So perhaps the sacred drama witnessed by the faithful did not depict the abduction of Persephone, but rather the abduction by Cadmus of Harmonia, a goddess who, according to the local version of the myth, was the daughter of Zeus and Electra and was raised on Samothrace. The myth tells us that Cadmus eventually married Harmonia. But how did they arrive at this marriage, and why was it important for the mysteries of Samothrace? According to mythology, when Zeus carried off Europa, her brothers, among them Cadmus, who would later become the founder of Thebes, set out in search of her. In his search for his sister, Cadmus came to Samothrace. There, he encountered the goddess Harmonia and was initiated into the island's mysteries. In one version of the myth, Cadmus abducted Harmonia, and once the goddess was found, their wedding was celebrated on Samothrace, most likely at the sanctuary of the great gods. This marriage was especially significant, as it was said to be the first wedding celebrated jointly by gods and mortals. Thus, in the mysteries of Samothrace, the marriage of Cadmus and Harmonia appears to have played a central role in the initiation ritual. It is possible that initiates reenacted Harmonia's nocturnal search while carrying torches, followed by a sacred drama depicting her marriage to Cadmus, culminating in the climax of the initiation ceremony. The sanctuary covers an area of approximately 50,000 square meters and acquired the monumental buildings that survive today from the 4th century BC onwards, when it became associated with the Macedonian kings, beginning with Philip II. It was here, during their initiation, that Philip met Olympias, with whom he later had a son, Alexander the Great. Centuries later, the same sacred ground offered refuge to Perseus, the last king of Macedonia, after his defeat by the Romans at Pydna in 168 BC. At the sanctuary, worshippers offered dedications to the gods. In antiquity, such dedications were gifts presented in gratitude or in the hope of securing divine favor. In the great sanctuaries of the ancient world, however, they also served as visible expressions of political power and prestige, since they could be seen by all who visited the site. During the Hellenistic period, the sanctuary of the great gods received lavish offerings from rulers of the Hellenistic kingdoms, particularly the Ptolemies of Egypt, as part of the political competition and display of the time. One of the most spectacular of these dedications, and one you may well know, is the marble statue of the Winged Victory of Samothrace, or Nike of Samothrace as it's also called, now housed in the Louvre Museum in Paris, originally dedicated at the sanctuary by the Rhodians. Now, let us move on and take a guided journey through the site, taking a closer look at the stages of initiation. Access to the sanctuary was gained via a road that began at the west gate of the ancient city and led to the monumental propylon at the entrance to the sacred precinct, the first building encountered by the visitor. It was a dedication of King Ptolemy II of Egypt and stood at the highest point of the sanctuary, making it visible both from the island's northern shore and from the ancient city. Its architecture was striking. On the side facing the city, it featured 6 Ionic columns, while on the side facing the sanctuary, it had 6 Corinthian columns. Both facades bore inscriptions explicitly naming the dedicator. As we move further north, we come to the theatrical circle, a circular structure dating to the late 5th or early 4th century BC. It was likely associated with rituals that prepared people for initiation, as well as ceremonies that followed. Beside it stood a rectangular marble building with 6 Doric columns on its facade. An inscription on its architrave thousands of years later informs us that the building was dedicated to the sanctuary by Philip III and Alexander IV, the half-brother and the son of Alexander the Great, respectively. The next building further north is the impressive tholos, a donation to the sanctuary, this time by Queen Arsinoe II, in the early 3rd century BC. It was most likely used to serve the ceremonial needs of distinguished visitors who came to the sanctuary from other cities, while sacrifices were offered at its entrance. To the north and east of the tholos, you will see the small sacred house and the anaktoron, two adjoining structures closely connected with the initiation rites. The anaktoron is an elongated building, and its northern section was raised and set apart from the rest, forming an inner sanctuary, an aditon. An inscription found here conveys something of the mystical atmosphere of the place. It tells us that entry was permitted only to the initiated. Imagine that here, within the sacred aditon of the anaktoron, holy rites may have been performed during the first stage of initiation, and that the priests revealed sacred symbols to the mystes. South of the tholos, we encounter the Hall of the Ritual Dancers, the first marble building of the sanctuary of the great gods. Built after the mid-4th century BC, it appears to have been one of the most important structures in the initiation process. The building had a monumental entrance with Ionic columns, leading into two rectangular rooms set side by side. It was adorned with a marble frieze depicting a procession of young women dancing. The scene is organized in groups, each consisting of a musician followed by dancers. It has been suggested that the frieze represents the mythical marriage of Cadmus and Harmonia. In this interpretation, a sacred drama reenacting that wedding may have been performed here in the Hall of the Ritual Dancers during the festivals. According to a more recent view, however, the hall was primarily associated with the first stage of initiation and epoptia. At the heart of the sacred precinct, south of the Hall of the Ritual Dancers, stands the Hieron. It is an imposing rectangular structure with 2 rows of Doric columns along its northern facade. An inscription found near the building explicitly forbade entry to the uninitiated. But if you had been initiated, you could cross the threshold of its monumental entrance and sit on the marble benches that lined the long sides of the interior. According to one interpretation, it was here in the Hieron, specifically at its rear, that the second degree of initiation, the epoptia, was performed. According to a more recent view, however, the building functioned as a temple of the great gods. Next to the Hieron stood another building, rectangular in shape, with Doric columns along its western facade. It was roofless and enclosed a monumental marble altar, hence its name, the altar court. Immediately beyond, and very close to the altar court, lies the theater of the sacred precinct, built into the slope of the hill. Theatrical contests were likely held here. Behind the theater, on its southern side, stood the monument of the Winged Victory of Samothrace, which visitors would have seen rising above the upper tiers of the sitting. This iconic statue was discovered in 1863 during excavations led by the French vice-consul in Adrianople, a city in modern-day Turkey. He later transported the sculpture to France, where it remains today on display at the Louvre Museum. As we conclude our tour of the sacred precinct, we see that its western side was defined by the great stoa, a colonnaded structure with Doric columns built to accommodate the ever-increasing number of worshippers. North of the stoa stands the neorion, The Ship Monument, a building constructed to house a worship dedicated to the great gods. Next to it, a series of banquet rooms may have been associated with ritual meals. The sanctuary of the great gods on Samothrace was a place of mystery worship from the 7th century BC, reaching the peak of its prosperity in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. Towards the end of the 4th century AD, its story seems to reach a conclusion, as the sanctuary was abandoned. Yet its history did not end there. Thousands of years later, it reached the present day. Samothrace remains a place that whispers its secrets through the centuries, from the priests revealing sacred symbols to the iron rings of the initiates that bound them to the gods, gods whose names were not to be spoken once he left this place, and to the impressive dedications offered by the faithful. The sanctuary of the great gods reminds us of a time when faith and initiation could unite men and women, kings and ordinary citizens beneath the same purple cloth. This is where our journey comes to an end. We hope you enjoyed the story and the path we shared. If you'd like to discover more of Greece's cultural treasures, follow our channel, Hellenic Heritage Journeys, on Spotify. Until next time.